Welcome to Danny and Jack's Nonfiction Book Podcast.
Today we will discuss The Devil in the White City and Drop Out and Get Schooled. This podcast will cover information about the speaker, style, author's claims, questions we had, relevance to issues in text that have been mentioned in class, and how our books are applicable to current events in history.
First, we will talk about the speakers of each book. Drop Out and Get Schooled was written by Patrick Bet-David and Thomas N. Ellsworth. Drop Out and Get Schooled discusses reasons behind why going to college is not necessary for certain individuals pursuing a future in entrepreneurship. The first author is Patrick Bet-David, an Iranian immigrant who started PHP agency and corporations after leaving the military. He now teaches entrepreneurship, business, and is also a financial advisor. Thomas N. Ellsworth is an experienced CEO and author who is the president and COO of PHP agency and corporations. He was previously the CEO and chairman of PDP and has held very high positions in numerous other companies.
The Devil in the White City takes place during the Gilded Age and gives a vivid description of what life and culture were like during that time. The book starts out by emphasizing the rise of nationalism in America during the late 19th century. The Eiffel Tower had just been built and Americans wanted something as iconic as France's new landmark. In Chicago, architectural firms like Burnham and Root began filling the city with skyscrapers. When Americans found out that the 1893 World Fair would take place somewhere in the country, they immediately thought it would either be in New York or Chicago. Eventually, everyone decided that Chicago would be the best place for the fair. Once the fair took place, the book transitions from describing the Gilded Age to telling the story of how the fair came to be and of Dr. H.H. Holmes. Holmes is a handsome young doctor who seems pretty friendly. However, being a doctor is just a cover-up for his true passion, being a serial killer. This book was written by Eric Larson, an American author that was born on January 3rd, 1954, and grew up in Long Island, New York. Currently, Larson writes for companies such as The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The Wall Street Journal.
In this next section of the podcast, we will explain the style and structure of each of our books. In Drop Out and Get Schooled, the structure is structured by a new argument every chapter that flows in a chronological order in the steps for considering attending college. For example, the first chapter is titled, Why We Go to College, making an argument for why people should go to college, whereas the second chapter is titled, Who Should Go to College, making an argument about what types of people should be attending college versus people that shouldn't. This structure makes the argument for not attending college easier to follow, and more persuasive to the reader due to the step-by-step process set up by the chapter structure.
The style of The Devil in the White City is very unique for a nonfiction book. The New York Times said it was a dynamic, enveloping book that relentlessly fuses history and entertainment to give this nonfiction book the dramatic effect of a novel. I can advocate for what they say. I believe Larson did a phenomenal job recreating history in a way that appeals to all readers. The book starts out with a descriptive tone about the culture of the Gilded Age, then transitions to telling the true story of the 1893 World Fair and America's first serial killer.
Now we will discuss the claims of both of our authors. Patrick Bet-David makes the claim that college isn't worth it for 70% of college students. In Chapter 3, he states that, I also strongly believe that people who are not interested in engineering, sciences, or medicine may find a faster path to their vision without college. This supports his main claim because he addressed that only certain majors require a college education. Another claim he makes is in Chapter 5, when he states, see which career path fits your interests, then assess whether a college degree would be an asset to your path to success. This statement supports David's main claim because it addresses that only a handful of students need to be attending college for success.
Throughout the story, Larson argues about many different topics. However, the argument we will discuss today is about the negative effects of nationalism. On page 15, Larson says, even Eiffel's Tower, forecast by wishful Americans to be a monstrosity that would disfigure forever the comely landscape of Paris, turned out to possess unexpected elan, with a sweeping base and tapered shaft that evoked the trail of a skyrocket. This humiliation could not be allowed to stand. America's pride and its growing power and international stature had fanned patriotism to a new intensity. The nation needed an opportunity to top the French, in particular, to out Eiffel. Obviously, this quote displays the high level of nationalism that persisted during the Gilded Age. Americans wanted to have a building that was more grand than the Eiffel Tower. Daniel Burnham, an architect who worked on preparing Chicago for the 1893 World Fair, spent much of his time perfecting the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel was meant to show America's overall dominance and power over the world, and be the equivalent of the American Eiffel Tower. While most Americans were focusing on improving America's reputation, Dr. H.H. Holmes bought a pharmacy right next to the site of the fair. Holmes would then use this store as a front and kill dozens of people. Dr. H.H. Holmes was not just a serial killer. He also committed crimes such as insurance fraud and theft. He was initially arrested under suspicion of insurance fraud. It was only once detectives did a more thorough examination of his estate that they discovered he was a serial killer. Since America was so preoccupied with becoming the best, they overlooked many horrid acts of violence, like the case of Dr. H.H. Holmes, and many cases of corruption.
Now we are going to address some questions we have formulated during our reading. While reading Drop Out and Get Schooled, I developed two questions. My first question is, why does our society correlate success with attending certain colleges? I formed this question because this book made me realize how many people around me, especially parents and teenagers, stress so much about what college to attend, as if they don't get into a certain college, they won't be successful. Another question I formed was, what happens if you don't go to college, but don't end up finding a job and becoming successful? This is my second question because the book doesn't touch very much on a plan B for those who don't go to college and end up not experiencing the desired success the author explains they will experience throughout the book.
So, The Devil in the White City took place almost 125 years ago, so obviously I'm not very familiar with the culture and environment of the time, and naturally I had many questions. The first one was why no one realized all the people missing. But I came to believe this was due to Chicago's chaotic environment. Towards the beginning of the book, Larson said that around 4 people died in Chicago every day. So obviously it was not uncommon for people to go missing in Chicago. Also, there was a very high level of nationalism that exists in Chicago and the rest of America. Another question I had was why corruption and domestic violence has decreased so drastically since the Gilded Age. And the most logical explanation I came up with was that people became tired of corruption and violence and began progressing society.
Now we will discuss connections our books made to what we have read in class. This book relates almost perfectly to the most recent essay we did in class. In the synthesis essay we performed, the prompt asked about whether or not college was worth it. The documents for the essay provided valid reasons for attending college and not attending college. For example, 4 out of the 6 documents of the essay were leaning towards the non-college route, just as Drop Out and Get Schooled was. Providing reasons and evidence, just like the sources in the synthesis essay, Drop Out and Get Schooled gave many reasons why not going to college was an option for success. This can be put into conversation with the documents and essay because the documents were stating the same facts as Drop Out and Get Schooled, as well as using extremely similar statistics. The reasons provided in both the book and the essay were almost word by word similar. Therefore, the book would have been able to have been incorporated in the essay perfectly. Because of this, the book would be fit into the conversation perfectly, as well as the synthesis essay. Because the book not only gives more detailed stats and reasons for not attending college, it also debunks the essay's documents stating why college was beneficial.
There's a lot of deception and manipulation in The Devil in the White City, very similar to The Great Gatsby. In The Great Gatsby, the upper class is selfish and only cares about bettering themselves, and don't care about the cost of their advancements. In other words, the upper class sacrifice the well-being of others to improve their own. This is very similar to The Devil in the White City, specifically when Dr. H.H. Holmes was constructing a new building for his killing. Throughout the construction, Holmes fired the workers almost weekly so that no one would find out about his intentions with the building. Holmes didn't care about what happened to the workers after he fired them, even if it made them unemployed or made them so they couldn't provide for their families. And this selfishness is almost identical to the selfishness of the upper class in The Great Gatsby, which makes it extremely easy to put into conversation.
Now for the last part of the podcast, we will make connections with our books to current events and history. Drop Out and Get Schooled connects to the recent uprising of people dropping out of college or not attending college at all. Due to the rise of student loans and college and graduate debt, people are hesitating to attend college. According to Ronald Bears, a writer for the Washington Post, He states, "Simple economics tells us that student debt will increase, college costs will increase, and student success rates will decrease. This recent drop in success rates in college graduates and the increase of student debt has caused for the decrease of college students. This problem has recently increased, and according to experts, it's not going to slow down anytime soon." This current event directly relates to Dropout and Get Schooled because the book examines these trends in the college graduate debt and various other reasons why college graduates are not getting what they signed up for.
The Devil in the White City was published in 2004, which was not far after the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon. Many believe that this attack occurred because of the lack of security in American airports. Americans were so proud of their country and failed to notice what was going on around them. The attack could be executed due to the high level of nationalism that existed during that time, which is very similar to what happened at the 1893 World Fair with Dr. H.H. Holmes.
That's all we have for today, and thanks for listening to Danny and Jack's Nonfiction Book Podcast.